Hello students, today we will be studying General Anatomy of Joints Part 1. Now when we say joint is a connection between two or more bones. Now morphologically when we classify the bones, we talk of long bones, flat bones, irregular bones, etc. Now when we talk of a joint between the long bones, this is seen at the ends of the long bones. So long bones articulate by their ends, while flat bones articulate by their margins and irregular bones articulate by their surfaces. The same is seen here. What you see here is the elbow joint, which is formed between the long bones, that is the lower end of humerus, and the upper ends of radius and ulna. So these are long bones which form joints by their ends. What we see here are the flat bones of the calvarium or the skull cap. What we see here is the sagittal suture, which is seen between the two parietal bones. So these two flat bones are forming a joint by their margins. Whereas what we see here is an irregular bone, that is the vertebra. So adjacent vertebrae, as we see here, are forming joint by the surface, that is upper and lower surfaces of the adjoining vertebrae are forming the joint here. So long bones articulate by their ends, flat bones articulate by their margins, and irregular bones articulate by their surfaces. Now let us see how do we classify joints. According to the function, joints can be classified as synarthrosis and diarthrosis. Synarthrosis, these are solid joints without any joint cavity, and they are further divided into two types: fibrous joints and cartilaginous joints. Fibrous joints have no movement at all, so they are immovable joints, whereas cartilaginous joints have restricted movements, so they are partially movable joints. Whereas diarthrosis, these form synovial joints with a joint cavity which is filled by synovial fluid, and it permits free movements. So freely movable joints are diarthrosis. Now let us study the different types of fibrous joints. Now in fibrous joints, the bones are united by fibrous tissue, and there are three subtypes here: sutures, syndesmosis, and gomphoses. Sutures. Examples are the joints which are seen in the skull bone. They appear between bones that ossify in membranes. The residual unossified sutural membrane intervenes between opposed margins with continuous periosteum on the outer and inner surfaces. So bones which ossify by membrane show presence of sutures, and it is the unossified sutural membrane which lies between the opposed margins of these flat bones. Now let us see what are the different types of sutures which we know of. 5 different types have been described. First we study a plain suture. In this, the borders of the opposing margins of flat bones are plain. Picture showing us the same. This here is a plain suture. So the borders are plain. An example of where we see such a plain suture is the suture between the palatine processes of the two maxillae bones. Second type is the serrate suture. Here the opposing margins have a saw-tooth-like appearance. So what we see here is a serrate suture where saw-tooth-like appearance is seen at the opposing margins of the flat bones. An example of this being the sagittal suture. Next is Squamous suture, bones united by overlapping each other. So what is seen here, these are the two flat bones and they sort of overlap each other so that the suture or the sutural surface is slanting. That's what's called as a squamous suture. And where do we see this? Example is suture between the parietal bone and squamous part of the temporal bone. Next is denticulate suture. Here the margins present teeth-like processes. So what is seen here? These are the margins which show teeth-like processes. An example of this type of suture is the lambdoid suture. Lastly, we see the wedge and groove suture, which is also called as Syndesmosis. Herein, the bony ends forming the suture are like a wedge fitted into a groove. So what is seen here? This is the groove and above that is a wedge-shaped bony process which forms the joint. An example here is the suture between the rostrum of sphenoid bone and the upper margin of the vomer. So what is seen here is the rostrum of sphenoid which forms the wedge which sits on the ala of vomer which is forming the groove. So this is wedge and groove suture or Syndesmosis. So these are the 5 different types of sutures that we are studying. Next we want to see the second type of fibrous joint, which is syndesmosis. In this type of joint, the bones are a little distance apart from each other and are united by intraosseous membrane. What we see here in this picture is the lower ends of the tibia and the fibula bones. Bones are lying distance apart and are connected by an intraosseous membrane. So example of syndesmosis is the inferior tibiofibular joint, and similarly there is a middle radioulnar joint which is seen between the shafts of radius and ulna bones. So these are examples of syndesmosis. The third type of fibrous joint which we study is Gomphoses or peg and socket joints. These are seen at the roots of the teeth in sockets of jaw united by the fibrous tissue. So what is seen here? This is a tooth. So this here lower part is the root of the tooth, and what we see here is the alveolar process of the jawbone, either maxilla or mandible. So these two are joined or united by fibrous tissue. So this is Gomphoses or peg and socket joint type of fibrous joint. So we've studied all the 3 types of fibrous joints: sutures, syndesmosis and Gomphoses. Now let us see the cartilaginous joints. These are of 2 types: synchondrosis and symphysis. Synchondrosis, also known as primary cartilaginous joint. Herein, the bones are united by a plate of hyaline cartilage which is temporally situated. This hyaline cartilage gets replaced by bone, and that process is called as Synostosis. No movement is possible here, and it is purely designed for bone growth. Bones which form by endochondral ossification, that is, where a cartilage body is present initially and that cartilage gets converted to bone. When that happens, we talk of 3 parts of the bone, that is the diaphysis, the metaphysis and the epiphysis. Diaphysis is the shaft, metaphysis are the 2 ends, and epiphysis is the junction between the diaphysis and the metaphysis. This epiphysis is seen as an epiphyseal cartilage which is made up of hyaline cartilage, and so long as the bone grows in length, the cartilage grows and is gradually converted to bone. So this hyaline cartilage which is seen between the diaphysis and Metaphysis is what forms the primary cartilaginous joint. No movement is possible so long as the bone grows in length. This small cartilage piece will be present between the diaphysis and the metaphysis, and once the bone has grown its entire length, this cartilage also gets converted into bone, and that is what is called as synostosis. Example of primary cartilaginous joint is the junction between epiphysis and diaphysis of the long bones. So this is how it appears. Bone on one side, then is the hyaline cartilage, and then is bone on the other side. So this is synchondrosis or primary cartilaginous joint seen in the growing long bones. It is temporarily present and gets converted into bone as the length of the bone has completely grown. Second type of cartilaginous joint is symphysis or the secondary cartilaginous joint. In this type of joint, the articular surfaces of the bone are covered by hyaline cartilage and in turn united by a plate of fibrocartilage. This arrangement persists throughout life and mostly occupies the median plane of the body. These joints have limited movement. Example being the intervertebral disc between the vertebral bodies having annular fibrosis at the periphery and nucleus pulposus in the center. And all symphysis which are seen in the body, like symphysis mentae, symphysis pubis, these are all examples of secondary cartilaginous joints. So this is how it appears. Bone, its articular surface covered by hyaline cartilage, then the fibrocartilage which connects it to the opposite bone, whose articular surface in turn is covered by hyaline cartilage. So bone, hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage, hyaline cartilage and bone. That's the arrangement which is seen in the symphysis or in the secondary cartilaginous joints. This arrangement persists throughout life. It has limited movement. So this is the secondary cartilaginous joint. Thus we have studied the two types of cartilaginous joints, primary and secondary cartilaginous joints. So in this video, we have studied the definition of joint, its classification, and we studied details of two types of joints, that is the fibrous joints and the cartilaginous joints. So the synarthrosis is what we have done in this video. In the next video, we would be seeing details of the diarthrosis or the synovial joints. Thank you.